Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Well, I hate to tell you it's all bad martinis today, but it's all bad martinis. And there's not really a lot of wiggle room on these unless you want to throw in some crazy on a couple of them. But it is, for terrible NFL teams and their fans, a very exciting day. It's the start of free agency, so that's probably the best news. Also, NCAA tournament brackets come out in less than a week, so there's some positive stuff going on. It's just not what we're talking about today, but here's a silver lining in our first one. Jim Garrity got out of Syria just in time. So he talked about being glad he was home on his first day back on Wednesday. We talked about it a lot on the Friday special, and if you haven't heard the Friday special, you really, really need to. But then over the weekend, we found out that things have changed considerably just in the couple of days since Jim left. Newsweek magazine, of all places, kind of getting a good summary of this. Syria is experiencing its deadliest period since the ousting of longtime President Bashar al-Assad 3 months ago, as clashes have erupted between government forces and pro-al-Assad fighters this week, leaving hundreds of civilians and fighters dead. This is according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. But if you've been on social media, you've seen these clips of people getting kicked and dragged and executed. I mean, there's no question that it's happening. This is all happening with the Sunni Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in charge. It's called HTS for short. The leader of them is changed his name a couple of times now, but once was affiliated with ISIS, then the Al-Nusra Front and that sort of thing. Here is Joe Biden back in December when Assad fell.
We will engage with all Syrian groups, including within the process led by the United Nations, to establish a transition away from the Assad regime toward independent, sovereign, I want to say it again, sovereign Syria, with a new constitution, a new government that serves all Syrians. And this process will be determined by the Syrian people themselves. The United States will do whatever we can to support them, including through humanitarian relief, to help restore Syria after more than a decade of war.
Well, that's a nice pie-in-the-sky look. It increasingly looks like it's another radical band of Islamists getting rid of their opponents and installing the government that they want. But, Jim, we've basically got HTS targeting Christians, Alawites, which is the sect of the Assad. So the fact that there's still bad blood there is no surprise. Druze also affected by this. So given that you were just there, given what we know of the instability coming in here, what's your take on all of this unraveling pretty quickly here?
Greg, not only was I in Syria, I was in Latakia, which is where a lot of this violence was focused upon. Quiet while I was there, thank God. No, this is, as I tried to put it in the Morning Jolt today, you ever have like a car accident at an intersection you travel through all your time? Like, oh my God, I was just there. Well, that's what I'm feeling with regarding this part of Syria. And it's funny, and a good portion of the reporting I was doing out there was talking to people saying, how are you feeling? How's the transition been? What do you think of the new government? And I think, lots of people, including the patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church, had told me, well, cautious optimism, emphasis on cautious. They recognized that HTS was a band of mostly Islamists, some more extreme than others. Al-Jawlani turned al-Shara had been saying the right things, but it sounded like he was trying to make it sound like he turned over a new leaf, but there's very good reason to be wary at best and skeptical perhaps at worst. And something like this, look, when you have a whole bunch of militias with, Islamist agendas, not exactly shocking that somebody did not get the memo that we are going to try to live in peace with other sects and other religions and focus on rebuilding our country. There were some reports saying that this was not so driven by the core HTS out of Damascus, and it was more militias that were affiliated with the Chechens. Hey, Greg, who did I talk to out there? Oh, that's right, a Chechen jihadist. But he was in Damascus, and he said he was awaiting for orders. So I don't think I knew anyone personally who was involved with this, but it's still not great to hear. And this is not the biggest tragedy in this, but it's so much of the conversations I had were before this had happened. And I don't know if this is necessarily a huge turning point. A couple of my buddies are saying, this may pass. I don't think it's easy for the U.S. government to look at the new government in Syria the same way after something like this. Now, reportedly, al-Shara is sending out his own military units to go there, get the situation under control and end the violence. We'll see how that works out. I think it's safe to say that after something like this, there's going to be enormous skepticism in the West that they genuinely mean what they say. And again, maybe this is rogue factions within their coalition. I'm reminded of those darn rogue low-level employees in Cincinnati that caused all those problems for the IRS a couple of years ago. Look, maybe it isn't that, but the world sees Syria as a basket case, as it's a place where the primary export is trouble. And so they're not going to be inclined in lifting sanctions and re-engaging with Syria if it is the kind of place where things like this are happening. The Patriarch of Syria had said, before the civil war, there were apparently close to 2 million Christians in Syria. Now they're down to between 1 million and a half a million. It's been 13 years of civil war. Christians, anybody who could afford it, got out of there. And there are certain areas that were a little more secure. Before we move on, I just want to point out there's this perception that formed this is why the U.S. should never have supported the toppling of Assad. Let's point out, we didn't really set policy in Syria. That was always going to be up to the Syrians. And it's, Assad was every bit the bastard people said he was. The argument that Assad was the defender of Syrian Christians is an oversimplification, I think, to the point of misleading. It is more accurate to say that he had no beef with the Syrian Christians so long as they supported him. He jailed plenty of Christians. If you spoke out against the regime, he'd throw you to jail. They'd torture you. They did all the usual bad stuff. And there were plenty of Syrian Christians who were victims of the civil war. The Assad forces and the Russian air forces were not exactly known for their precise aim when it came to attacking rebel groups and stuff like that. So I don't like this revisionism I'm seeing that Bashir Assad was some sort of hero who was defending the Christian communities from the Islamists. It's bad guys against bad guys with some slightly less bad guys on one side, but the wariness is well earned over there. Hopefully this is just a short-lived spurt of violence, but it's the Middle East, Greg. I don't bet a lot of chips on things turning out just hunky-dory.
No. This is horrible people against horrible people, and the horrible people won, and so they're going to do horrible things. Most likely, there was a joint statement from the patriarchs throughout the Orthodox Church decrying the killing, so they obviously see this as a major, major issue. You hope that Biden's right. Well, you don't hear me say that often. That the Syrian people are actually going to get to determine their future. You'd love to see that. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. This is probably going to be orchestrated by this HTS, which leads me to a question for you, Jim. I don't know if you know the answer, but the Assad regime was obviously bankrolled by Iran, and we'll talk more about Iran in our third martini. But these are Sunnis now. In the neighborhood, you've got Erdogan, who's a Sunni. Who's bankrolling HTS? Who's behind them? Who helped them get to the Damascus and topple Assad in that weeks-long rush there in December?
Turkey's a big factor in that. Erdogan was definitely a major player in the outcome of this politics. Still a member of NATO, but Turks have not always been cooperative. And let's remember that putting aside my beef with them not allowing me into the country through the ground the way I wanted them to go through, nothing personal, Turkey. I've only spent 2 years in your country. No, but like the idea that Turkey was very happy to see the Assad regime toppled, and I think they saw themselves as potentially a major player there. Still will probably remain a major player there. But I also kind of get the feeling that all the Syrians I spoke to out there wanted the bloodshed to end. 13 years of civil war is a really long time. And as I mentioned, the neighborhoods that were utterly destroyed, there were a whole lot of people who were like, let's put this beyond. And even as we were walking around Idlib, which was kind of jihadist central, nobody was messing with us. Like there was kind of like everybody was exhausted from the war, and everybody's, aligned with our vision, or certainly there's no Thomas Jeffersons out there. But there was just generally a sense of it's time to rebuild. It's time to go back to our lives. And I think something like that, that's what makes this feel particularly just heartbreaking and a setback. And you kind of wonder what the weeks and months ahead will hold for Syria.
It's ugly and very discouraging. Not terribly surprising, but, you always want to have hope. And I'm glad that you found some while you were there. And let's hope that can be rekindled. But as we know, whether it's in the Middle East or elsewhere, a distinct minority can cause a whole lot of trouble, even if just about everybody else wants things to move forward. I would also love to see the media pay more attention to this. We also had, I think, 70 Congolese Christians beheaded earlier this month or late last month and barely got a peep. A little coverage on that.
Greg,
the worst thing.
The Israelis didn't do it, so you can't expect them to pay that much attention. We have dark, cynical jokes on this episode because that's all you're going to get today, folks. It's topics like these.
Yeah, a little bit bleak, All right, well, today's podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, if your year's off to a great start, that's fantastic. If it's not, and you're not quite hitting those goals and you're just frustrated, like you're spinning your wheels, maybe therapy is the right thing for you. It can feel like a big investment, but the state of your mind is just as important as your physical health. So let's talk numbers a little bit. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which adds up pretty fast. But with BetterHelp online therapy, you can save an average of 50% per session.
With more than 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people globally. That's convenient. You can join a session with the click of a button and helping you fit therapy into your busy life. And you can switch therapists at any time.
And that's a really big part of this, too, is because you want to be connected with a therapist that understands you, is on your wavelength, and is moving in the same direction you are. So pick one that's going to get the job done. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our bad/crazy martini here. And this is mixed messages as it relates to the Trump administration and Hamas. Of not that long ago, I think it was last week, where we got another kind of ultimatum post on Truth Social or Twitter from President Trump, Wednesday, actually. He says, quote, "Shalom Hamas means hello and goodbye. You can choose. Release all of the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it's over." Over in all caps for you, Trump wrote on Truth Social. "I have just met with your former hostages whose lives you have destroyed. This is your last warning. For the leadership, now is the time to leave Gaza while you still have a chance. Also, to the people of Gaza, a beautiful future awaits, but not if you hold hostages. If you do, you are dead. Make a smart decision. Release the hostages now, or there will be hell to pay later." All of that in all caps. Moving on. Now, yesterday, Adam Bowler, who is the U.S. hostage envoy, was making the rounds, and he was on State of the Union with Jake Tapper, and a couple of quick clips here to kind of explain why this seems a little bit schizophrenic. But first of all, he says Israel's done a great job of putting Hamas on the brink of political extinction.
I do think there's hope. I think that Israel has done a wonderful, masterful job eliminating Hamas, Hezbollah, a number of other enemies in the state that makes things possible that weren't possible before. And I think you could see something like a long-term truce where we forgive prisoners, where Hamas lays down their arms, where they agree they're not part of the political party going forward. I think that's a reality that's real close.
But in a different part of that same interview, Jake Tapper brought up a complaint about Bowler directly talking with Hamas, a complaint lodged by Ron Dermer, an official in the Israeli government. And here's how that exchange went.
Axios' reporter Barak Ravid is reporting the top Israeli official, Ron Dermer, strongly discouraged you from talking directly with Hamas. He said it was a tense phone call. Tell us about that. Do you understand why Netanyahu, Dermer, others might be upset?
I do understand. I spoke with Ron, and I'm sympathetic. He has someone that he doesn't know well, making direct contact with Hamas. Maybe I would see them and say, look, they don't have horns growing out of their head. They're actually guys like us. They're pretty nice guys.
They're not pretty nice guys. I think we can pretty much get to that conclusion about as quickly as possible. So, Jim, is this an example of the Trump administration, again, trying to play neutral broker like with Russia and Ukraine, or is this just sowing confusion?
I certainly feels like sowing confusion. Greg, when I hear U.S. officials say that Hamas are nice guys, they're pretty nice guys, and that they don't have horns on their head, I really want to ask, did you feel the foreheads? You sure? Because looking at what they did on October 7th, they sure as hell seem to have, horns on top of their head. Look, one of the things I liked best out of this beginning Trump administration was the directness and the way President Trump talked about Hamas holding, at that point, I believe it was 5 American hostages. 4 are out. There's still one, a dual citizen, 21-year-old from New Jersey, who is held in Hamas custody. They still have, I believe, 20-some Israelis. They still have the bodies of another 20 to 30-some more. And I believe that the Biden administration kept getting strung along in these pointless negotiations. I was really hoping Trump was going to change it. Instead, we've got not just, the usual negotiations that seem to go nowhere. we've now broken our unspoken rule about not negotiating directly with terrorists, and now we are negotiating directly with them. And one of our guys is going on national television and talking about how they're pretty nice guys. Now, regarding the Trump administration approaches, my first thought would be pick one. I really think you either need to tell these people, release the hostages, you're going to have hell to pay, or you can have direct negotiation. You can't have both. First of all, these are like just completely night and day approaches, and I think the latter one, the only thing that could possibly justify direct negotiations is if you're going to get results. And apparently, according to Axios, we've been doing this for weeks. Well, at some point, the direct negotiation, like you're rewarding Hamas, you're legitimizing them, you are putting them on the same level as yourself. So the short answer, no, you should not be holding these negotiations unless they suddenly hand them out tomorrow, which it certainly doesn't look like they're going to do. And the other thing is that if you're president of the United States and you say you're going to unleash hell and you don't do it, well, then you're doing the opposite of Teddy Roosevelt's speak softly and carry a big stick. You are speaking very loudly, and the stick never appears. And I think that is very bad for American credibility. I think it's very bad for Trump's credibility. I think when you look at the way Putin, increased bombing after Trump's threatened sanctions, that basically, I think there are a whole bunch of I think all the bad actors in this world don't really think Trump follows up on his threats. I think they see Trump as all bark and no bite. And I think that's going to have very serious consequences for the United States. So, Mr. President, I'd love to be proven wrong. I would love to see you get all of the hostages released. I'd love to see you get the remains of the hostages released. In this area, I'm rooting for you 110%. I just don't understand what your strategy is. And it feels like it's flailing. It just feels like we're talking really tough, but we're not actually going to do it. We're going to have direct negotiations, and our guy's going to go on national TV and talk about what nice guys Hamas is. It just seems like a mess. And I really want to see America have a clearer perspective on this issue and honestly on a whole bunch of issues as this administration continues.
Yeah, and one of the other things Bowler said is there might be a full prisoner/hostage swap, which would be thousands of Hamas figures and Palestinians in exchange for hostages, which is patently unfair on a number of reasons, not just the numbers, but the fact that these are murderous militants. These people were abducted and in some cases already dead. You don't know exactly what kind of horrific figures you're going to be letting go in that situation.
Yeah, we were just talking about how Hamas is at the brink of destruction. Well, if you release tens of thousands of prisoners because of Hamas's negotiations, don't you think that strengthens them some? Don't you think it looks like they've got a much stronger hand to play?
I'm sure they feel like they have to make some concessions to get them off the political playing field. Not that I think they will leave under any circumstances, or renounce violence or acknowledge Israel's right to exist or any of these things. But just dangling some carrots, hoping they'll bite at something there. We'll see. But Hamas's track record is very consistent, and none of it's good. I'll tell you what is good, though. Oracle. Even if you think it's a bit overhyped, artificial intelligence is suddenly everywhere, from self-driving cars to molecular medicine to business efficiency. And if it's not in your industry yet, it is coming, and it's coming fast. But AI needs a lot of speed and computing power. So how do you compete without your costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud. It's called Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI.
OCI is a blazing fast and secure platform for all of your infrastructure, database, application development needs, plus all your AI and machine learning workloads. OCI costs 50% less for computing and 80% less for networking, so you're saving a pile of money. Thousands of businesses have already upgraded to OCI, including Vodafone, Thomson Reuters, and Suno AI.
Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment. Offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies for this special offer at oracle.com/martini. That's oracle.com/martini. All right, Jim, what would a three-part, three-martini lunch be focusing on the Middle East without at least touching on Iran? And that's where we are in our third martini here. Iran has, of course, long been the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, bankrolling Hamas, who we just talked about, Hezbollah, obviously, the former Assad regime, all sorts of horrible elements in Iraq during the Iraq War, which targeted our soldiers and other servicemen for death, and in some cases certainly succeeded. But now apparently it's complicated, and perhaps we're overdoing it on Iran. According to Tucker Carlson, he tweeted out on Saturday, Fox News is wall-to-wall with dead-eyed politicians telling you that Iran is a dangerous, quote-unquote, sponsor of terror, softening up the base for a war. But what exactly does that phrase mean, and how does it apply to the United States? Here's one measure. Over the past 20 years, how many Americans have been killed by Iran on American soil? Try to find that number, and then compare it to the number of Americans killed by drug ODs, or suicide, or illegal aliens, or carjackings, diabetes, and the COVID vax. Still think Iran is the greatest threat? How about we focus on our own country for a minute? End of tweet. So I love how he says it has to be on American soil because the ones Hamas killed, bankrolled by Iran, apparently don't count. You also have the Houthis who killed American service members in Jordan. Apparently that doesn't count because it's not in America. We also are seeing headlines lately that Iran is pretty darn close to having the nuclear material to put together nuclear weapons. So, look, I don't know anyone who wants a full-out war with Iran. Literally, I don't know one person who wants a full-out war with Iran. But with Iran getting closer and closer to deployable nuclear weapons, whether it's with sanctions, whether it's with other serious international disincentives, something's got to be done to keep them in check.
I'm not sure where to begin. Each time you think Tucker Carlson has found some new low to plummet through, he brings out the excavation equipment and digs even deeper. I yearn for the good old days when he was, interviewing Vladimir Putin and shopping in a Russian grocery store and talking about how great the prices were in absolute, not mentioning to anyone the exchange rate, which had a bit of a factor in why those prices were so great in Russian bologna or whatever it was he was buying there. I guess he's distributing Russian bologna, not just buying it. When he laments the dead-eyed pupils of pundits on cable news, I really think that's a lighting issue. And if they shine the lights brighter, they'll have that murderous gleam in the eye that he would be denouncing instead of these allegedly being dead-eyed. No, you make a very good point. His use of statistics and the on-American soil caveat, I'm reminded of some sort of, left-wing group that was talking about the menace of right-wing white nationalist or white supremacist terrorism and how it was much, much worse than the threat of Islamist terrorism. Now, lest anyone get any doubt about it, both types are bad, right? And I don't want to see anybody die in any terrorism. Really, in the end, Greg, I don't care if you're tan, white, black, what the color of your skin is. If you're terrorist, I want you to get the full Jack Bauer treatment. I envision a CTU torture room that looks like America, which every kind of terrorist of every color and hue is being treated equally badly. But this chart looked at the number. It was a very high number of people who had been killed in white nationalist terrorism, and a fairly low number of Americans who had been killed in Islamist terrorism. Hey, Greg, guess what the first date on the chart was? September 12th, 2001. They just happened to start on that date. Gee, because if you had, that would have kind of thrown the numbers off. When you take out a good 3,000, that does put them in a lot higher one. So Tucker Carlson has been offering this kind of nonsense line that America, if you care about X, therefore you don't care about Y. If you are concerned about foreign threats, therefore you're not worried about fentanyl or heart disease or diabetes. If America wants to deal with diabetes, well, that has to do with our diet and our exercise and our weight management. And there are certain medications that can help and all that stuff. And none of this has anything to do with Iran. None of this has anything to do with the fact of Iranian nuclear program, but their sponsorship of terrorists, their sponsorship of hostile regimes, their oil smuggling that they use to keep their economy going. By the way, didn't they try to assassinate Trump? Isn't Tucker's best buddy Trump? Wasn't Tucker telling that he couldn't pick Trump, that he couldn't pick Marco Rubio because then the deep state was going to assassinate him? I think we could. All of a sudden, Tucker doesn't care about assassination attempts on Trump as long as it's the Iranians doing it. If the Iranians are trying to come, it's no big deal. Do we give the Iranians bonus points because they're not good at it, because it hasn't succeeded yet? It is absolute bonkers nonsense on stilts, and I would love to sort out how much of the Tucker Carlson audience watches him for the amusement factor, what I always kind of figured was a portion of the Alex Jones base. You always, or even go back to the old Howard Stern. You don't necessarily like him, but you're always kind of waiting in anticipation of what outrageous thing he's going to say next. And how many people genuinely believe this crap that he's peddling? Because yes, Iran is a threat to Americans, both on overseas. By the way, as somebody who travels, yes, I do care about trying to kill Americans overseas. Although you might have second thoughts about that when you look at my itinerary. And why is he running around telling people that Iran is not a threat? Yes, an all-out war between the U.S. and Iran would be really terrible. You have to try to prevent those wars. But one of the ways you prevent the wars is through deterrence, which is one of the reasons you want to build up your military and you want to put in a situation where Iranian's economy is as weakened as possible, which the sanctions are as tough as possible, in which they cannot develop a nuclear weapon. And there's all kinds of other ways. And okay, every once in a while, you take out a Soleimani when he steps out of the country. Does Tucker not like that part? If so, you should say so to Trump. We'll see how that conversation goes.
Sometimes when you want to be edgy all the time, you go over the edge. You got to go over the edge to stay edgy. So I'm not sure what his angle is on this one, but obviously Iran is one of the worst actors on the international stage. So anyway, Jim, I wish we could start the week on happier news. Hopefully we'll have more. We certainly can't have less as the week goes on. So that's a positive way to spin it. See you on Tuesday.
Things can only get better from here, Greg. See you tomorrow.
Oh, gosh. Now you might have jinxed it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a great Monday. Join us again Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.